Indylive.radio. The Daytime Show. Indylive.radio. The Daytime Show. Indylive.radio.
It's Friday, it's 11 o'clock, and it can only mean one thing. Welcome to this week's Indylive.radio Daytime Show. And we have two great guests on the show for you today. First of all, you'll be hearing from Tony Grahame, who's a long-serving SNP activist and has done a recent series of presentations to the SNP membership on Both Votes SNP, and you'll be hearing more from Tony later. Also in our show, you'll hear from another really interesting guest too, and that is Frank McGroarty, also known by his DJ name of Frankie Boy. And Frank is a very interesting person who has done all sorts of things in his life. He's a published author. He was a redcoat, famously a redcoat at Butlins, and some of his books are about that. So you'll be hearing from Tony Grahame and Frank McGroarty later on in the show. Before we go on to that, I'd just like to give you a heads up for a special edition of the show that we're doing next week. Marlene Halliday and I, Valerie Gold. The Daytime Show special edition next Friday, which is the 5th of March. We are going to be doing a special, probably an extended edition of the Daytime Show for International Women's Day. And that show will be repeated on Monday, the 8th of March, which is also the actual day of International Women's Day. And we're going to be featuring a whole selection of really interesting women. Some of them are well known, some of them are not so well known, but who all have something original and interesting to say about the theme of this year's International Women's Day, which is Choose to Challenge. Some of the people who will be appearing are Leslie Riddick, Nigit Riaz, Alison Thulis, Ruth Wishart, Kirsty Hughes, Rosa Salih, Agnes Talmy, Shona Craven, Michelle Thompson, Isabel Lindsay. These are just a few. So we have veteran CND campaigners, we have human rights campaigners, we have journalists, politicians, a real cornucopia of women's voices for you. So tune in for that. That'll be next Friday at 11. Meanwhile, please continue listening to hear from our guests today, Tony Grahame and Frank McGroarty.
Good morning. It's Friday, it's 11 o'clock, and it's the Daytime Show, and I'm sitting, well, not with Val, but I'm sitting in a Zoom meeting with Val. Good morning, Val. How are you doing this morning?
Hi there. Very well, thank you.
That's great. And we have a guest with us this morning, Tony Grahame. Tony, you doing okay?
Yeah, surviving in these strange times.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we're going to be able to wend our way out of these strange times over the next few months. That would be great. So look, Tony, contact you to ask if you would come on the show as a guest. I know you've been involved in running, campaigns for a long time. I think you've got a bit of a mathematics background. And more recently, you've been involved in online meetings where you present the facts and the figures about how the list vote works and the pros and cons of having both votes for SNP or splitting vote for SNP and something else. So, I know you've been doing it for the last few weeks. What brought you up to create this presentation? What made you think about doing this?
It's a really good question, Marlene. I was reading, principally in the National, but also quite a few posts on social media. And I thought, these are really misleading people. The whole premise that they're pushing is actually misleading. And I started to worry that a lot of people would follow it, and that our wonderful chance to get independence might slip from our grasp and we'll shoot ourselves in the foot. Lots of metaphors in there, sorry. But it's almost ours to throw away, and I feel that we're throwing it away. And I also felt that the SNP HQ, they were preoccupied with a number of other things, internal wrangles and stuff like that, and have taken the eye off the ball. So I just started thinking through to myself, debating with others, and then I thought, I could do a better explanation of this. And others said to me, yeah, you've explained that really well. We understand it now. So that's what really drove me to it. It was just to explain things in a simple manner, but particularly the maths of the system and the politics of the whole decision. So that's the background.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are you pleased with how it's been going? The meetings that you've done?
It's been incredible. Over 1,000 people attended the online presentations, and have also been downloaded a lot of times now. I'm inundated with friend requests, and I'll say to your viewers, I can't accept them. It's just too many. My Facebook would choke up. So I'm sorry about that to people who sent me friend requests. I just can't add them all in. My Facebook is mostly for my family.
Yeah.
Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And actually, this is what I'm campaigning for. So, yeah, it's astonishing. I was logged onto Facebook once and saw a conversation, and somebody posted, "You really want to see this presentation by this guy, Tony Grahame? He's dead boring. But it's so informative." And I thought, never read your own reviews.
Could I butt in there, Tony, and say I would have to take exception with that, because I attended the Zoom, the Glasgow Zoom with Stacey Bradley, the national organisational convener, and yourself, and I didn't think it was boring at all, because it can be quite dry, some of these presentations. I thought you presented it in a very understandable and clear way.
Oh, thank you so much.
So can I ask you then, Tony, what your own background is, just for a bit of, you talked about the background to, Marlene asked you about the background of coming to do these presentations. I just wondered, have you always been a member of the SNP? Did Marlene said you had a maths background, so, what's your backstory?
Well, my backstory, many backstories, but summing it up, right? I was a member of the Labour Party for over 30 years. And actually, now don't tell any of your listeners this. This is a secret between us.
Okay.
I was actually an election agent for George Fawkes. So I have a big penalty on my head. I have to try and work out that, it's
pay penance for that.
Of this guilt.
You have to pay it back.
Imagine being an election agent for George Fawkes. But one of the things was, back in the 70s, when I started campaigning for the Labour Party, because I was a socialist, and I am a socialist, and at that stage I mistakenly thought this is the path to a fairer, socialist country and all the things I believe in. Completely mistaken, I know that now, but that was back then. But the Labour Party were exceptionally good at running elections at that time. They invented the Reading system and things like that. So they trained me up in campaigning techniques. And of course, I've grown and learned from that as well through the years, because I love to learn new things. Read books about it, studied it. I did a little bit of politics at uni, and also did pure maths, right? Statistics. So there's where the maths starts to come in as well. And my career has always been in IT. And mathematics came into a lot of it, including project planning and things like that. And I bring all that together. So I lived in the south of England for a long time, and there wasn't much point in being a member of the SNP in Bournemouth, actually. It wasn't exactly a Scottish independence hotbed. But when I moved up to Scotland in 1999, and my sister, Christine Grahame, MSP, stood for the Scottish Parliament, I started running her campaign, and I joined the SNP on my move back because it was the obvious thing to do.
Yeah.
And I've been hopping about the country lots of times for by-elections things since then, and learning from every by-election I've gone to. I mean, Dundee in particular, I learned so much from our parties in Dundee, and I've brought this to what I've been doing also.
I'm guessing, but Tony, that Bournemouth wasn't much of a hotbed for the Labour Party either.
No, but I was incredibly involved in the anti-poll tax campaign. And I can tell you an enormous story about that as well, because we sent 5 coaches to the big demo in London, and very briefly, because it is quite entertaining, I said to my wife, we were about to go on a wee holiday to France, I said, this is terrible, poll tax. They don't know what's coming down here. It's in Scotland. So I'll just write a letter to the papers which said, if you want to oppose it, write to me and we'll do something about this. And when we got back 2 weeks later, I couldn't open my front door for letters. And we started the East Dorset Anti-Poll Tax Union, which
had
5,000 members.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of makes up for George Folks, nearly.
Yeah, I hope so.
I was just going to ask back to the Both Votes SNP thing, which, as you say, has been much listened to and attended and paid attention to on the internet, and also when people have attended Zooms. I was just wondering, do you think, there is some dubiety about that, and I think that one of the catchphrases that a lot of these smaller parties use, and the Green Party as well, and I'd like you to give you the opportunity to dispel that, because I'm sure from your point of view and from a lot of people in the SNP's point of view, it is a myth. This idea that a vote for the SNP on the regional list, the second vote, is what they call a wasted vote. So what would you say to shoot that down in flames, Tony?
There's so much I could do, and my people who really want to know about it should tune into my little online things by region, actually, on how it works. First of all, what's really important is to say, what do we want? Do we want to eliminate or reduce the number of unionist MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, or do we want independence? Because a lot of the fixation is, let's get more Indy MSPs and less unionists. Personally, I want independence. So I start from that point of view and I say, how can I get there? What's the best route to get independence? And of course, in 2011, after the election, then the gold standard was set. The SNP got a majority. And when you've got a majority, you've got an electoral mandate. That's from the electorate. They've given you a majority. And that makes it extremely difficult for any Westminster government to deny you the right to hold that referendum, because you then are elected by the people of Scotland on a majority. But of course, in 2016, we didn't get that majority. And I thought, why didn't we get that majority? And how can we get that back again? And how can we get independence? So I'm starting not from eliminating unionist MSPs, but getting independence by the best method possible and the best way to go down it. So working through that process brought me to you actually need regional list MSPs to get majority. There's no doubt about that. And so I looked back over the claims and counterclaims of like Rise and Solidarity and the Greens, who said that every election, the SNP are going to take a whole majority just on constituency seats alone. The polls are so great. Going to win all these seats. They don't need list seats, so don't waste your votes on them. And I thought, but that didn't happen. In 2011, when we got the majority, we won 16 list seats to get us that majority. But in 2016, we lost 12 of them, and that denied us a majority. And the reason we lost those was our share of the vote went down by 2.3% in the list. It went up on the constituencies, but it went down in the list. And the Green vote, share of the vote, went up by exactly the same amount as ours went down. And I thought, the second vote Green campaign actually denied a lot of SNP list seats. So let's see how we can explain this to people, how the mechanism works, based on the important principle that we actually want independence, and the way to get independence is an SNP majority government. Does that start you off there?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a really comprehensive answer.
Yeah, and I was, I've heard you put it that, one way of talking about it to people is to, put over the idea that on one day, on the election, Holyrood election day, there are two elections happening. They're happening on the same day. And obviously, it's one for the constituency representatives, and then the other one's for the list votes. So, could you say a little bit about, what you mean when you say that there's two elections happening on the same day?
Yeah, absolutely. Because in my view, the actual list vote is actually more important than the constituency vote, because I view that as actually your vote to elect your government. And when people ask me how to explain it to others, I say, if you want to elect Nicola Sturgeon to head a government, an SNP government, that's what your list vote's for. Your constituency vote is for your constituency MSP. But your list vote is to elect your government. And it's really important that. And for us who are looking at independence and how we view it, we can't guarantee or count the number of constituency seats we'll get. And when we know that back in 2016, when we tracked the opinion polls, and I mentioned that earlier on, they peaked at 60% just months before the election. But by the time the election came, they dropped 13%, both on the constituency and the list. Now, we haven't actually reached the peaks of the opinion polls in the current run-up to the election that we did in 2016. So we're not in quite a strong position as we were then. And if the polls drop, as in the run-up to the election, and we must expect that, because the unionist media will fire every dirty story it can at the independence campaign, at Nicola Sturgeon. They will use everything they can to destroy our arguments. Then we must expect polls to drop. And that says to you, I can't count on what the opinion polls are currently saying to reflect what happens at an actual election. So the result is clearly going to be different in some way or another. Where does the list vote come in? It's your insurance policy to make sure you get that majority. And that's happened at every election. Now, if you go back right to the first Scottish Parliament elections in 1999 and so on, you find that the SNP used the list vote very effectively. First of all, to become the largest opposition, then to become a minority government in 2007, and then become a majority government in 2011, and of course get a referendum, right? I want to get us into that position again so that we can get that referendum.
Yeah. Is there something I wanted to ask about? So, I was struck watching your presentation when, you do say, I think you said more than once in it, but, you sort of say that what's important is the share of the list vote relative to other parties. It's not the absolute numbers. So it's a share of the list vote. So that's the one thing, if you could say a wee bit about that. But also that fluctuations in the list vote, quite small fluctuations, can bring about quite big changes in the final allocation of seats. So I don't know, is it possible to say a little bit about that without having a blackboard and chalk,
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I try not to be too geek-like about it. So I practice it on my wife, my neighbours, things like that. And they all run and hide from me. Yes, it's true. But yeah, the list vote, when I hear some of the new trying to start up Indy parties say the SNP would need 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 votes to get a seat, I go, that's just mathematically incorrect. Because the way the actual votes are allocated, they take into account, yes, the number of constituency seats you've won. They also take into account the number of votes you got, but they also take into account the number of votes the other parties got and the overall turnout. In other words, your share of the vote, because you have to take into account your vote in relation to the other party's votes at the same time. You cannot look at just one vote individually. And I explain this by saying that, let's just take Glasgow for an example. And as an Edinburgh person, I love to take Glasgow for an example. Right? And let's take Glasgow for an example where the SNP got, so many 100,000 votes, say, right? And the other parties got so many votes each, and the SNP didn't actually win any list seats. Now, what would happen, just for an example, and this is off the wall, but there we are, the SNP vote remained exactly the same. But the other parties' votes all, let's say, halved, right? It's ridiculous, but just say that, just to illustrate the mathematical point. That would mean that their share of the votes all reduced and ours massively increased. And that would trigger the winning of multiple list seats. So it's not your SNP vote on its own that counts towards counting list seats. It's in relation to all the others. And in relation to the others, that's called the share of the vote. It's crucial that people understand that. And I really don't like when people put up charts with 100,000, spreadsheets of all the rest of it. And people look at it and they think, I just see big numbers. I'll have to assume this is right because they're baffling me with big numbers. And it's really a slightly deceitful way to present it. They should explain that it depends on the share of the vote, basically, right? The way the D'Hondt system calculates, it is effectively working on the share of the vote.
Right.
Now, you asked me about small fluctuations, yes, and you're absolutely right. When you're the top of the food chain there, as the SNP is on the list, with the most votes, small fluctuations in the share of the vote, and I'm saying share of the vote, they make a big difference in the number of seats that are allocated. So the 2.3% reduction in the SNP share of the vote between 2011 and 2016 accounted partially for a loss of 12 seats. We gained 6 on the constituency, but we lost 12 on the list. Now, down at the bottom, the bottom ranking party to get a significant number of seats was, of course, the Greens, right? Now, they only got 6.6% of the vote in the Scottish Parliament election. They had an increase of 2.2% from 2011, almost exactly the same as the loss of the SNP. And that just got them 4 extra seats. So they get 4 extra seats for an increase of 2.2. We lose 12 for a decrease of 2.3. There's a multiplier effect. Works. Yeah. So if you want to boost, obviously, if you want to boost, the number of seats you win, you do it to the SNP. You increase your share of the vote. It's the easiest way to get more seats.
And can I ask you then what your view is on, when you mentioned earlier in the last Holyrood election 2016, small parties like Rise, who seem to have kind of disappeared, but we do have these other small parties that have emerged, like the Independence for Scotland Party and what was going to be the Alliance for Independence. I think they're now called Action for Independence. But it seems to me that, they've got these, you were talking about charts, and they produce a lot of these charts, with how many votes they could get and how many MSPs, but it seems, and they're only standing on the list, not in the constituency, but it seems to me that, as a sort of an outside observer, because I'm not in any of those parties, that they would have to get, a really high level of votes, I think more than 5%, before they could make any impact. And the fact that there are quite a few of them means that it's maybe not terribly realistic, because small new parties, take a while to get any public recognition or impact. I mean, sorry, I'm kind of answering my own question.
I'll go make a cup of tea.
Actually, Marlene can always edit that bit out later on. Okay, Tony, can I ask you what your view is for parties like the Independence for Scotland Party and Action for Independence? How do you see them fitting into this picture?
In a way, I can understand the existence of some, because people get frustrated. Yeah. And especially when we're locked up in COVID and you can't do the normal campaigning you would do, you start to go, right, I need to do something, right? And I think a fair bit of it is attributed to that. But history tells us to make a breakthrough, you need to get more than 5% of the list vote. And the more multiple small parties you are, it's slicing up and splitting that list vote even more and more. I think it was Professor John Curtis who said that small new parties in Scotland, they will struggle to make any breakthrough to get any percentage or any MSPs at all. And Rise, I think, from memory, got 0.6% after 2 elections they'd campaigned in. And the Scottish Solidarity got 0.5%. The Greens only got 6.6% of the list vote in 2016, and they've been campaigning for every Scottish Parliament election. They have a big organisation, they have funds, they have members. It's very difficult for small parties to get a breakthrough. But here's the crucial thing, and this really worries me, right? These small parties, they probably will take a few percentage of the vote. Not enough to get an MSP, but they will take a few percentage of the list vote. And that's got to come from the SNP and a bit from the Greens, right? That's where it'll come from. They're not targeting any other party. They're mostly targeting the SNP vote. And what happens if the SNP doesn't win these predicted super constituency things, and like 2011, we rely on list seats to get our majority. What happens if these list votes are taken from the SNP, given to small indie parties who don't get near the breakthrough limit? These are real wasted votes. And what could happen, and this is the worrying bit, is that with that reduction of SNP and Green MSPs, you could be letting unionists in. And the SNP list vote currently in the polls, and it's, I think it's going to drop as we get to election. It's not very high. It's not looking that strong. Now, we could end up with a unionist parliament if we manage to split the list vote enough ways. And that is a big worry, because we could kiss independence goodbye.
Be horrendous, isn't it?
I'm sorry to be depressing like that. I'm really worried about this.
No, it's realistic.
I mean, do you think, yeah, you could see it like a unionist majority, but would the Labour Party really hitch their flag to the Tory, one? I mean, they're in big enough trouble it is up here without doing that.
Yeah, they wouldn't form a coalition, obviously, but they would vote down an independence referendum.
Yeah,
and they would vote down independence, and that would kill us.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think if we did that and we self-inflicted this damage to the independence movement, I think the independence movement would fragment and break up. I really worry about that, because we're on the cusp of achieving everything, and to throw it away would just so disappointing.
Yeah, yes, indeed.
I hope that doesn't happen.
Well, yeah, I hope so as well. I mean, it does bring up one thing I wanted to ask you about. The thing about how would you put it? The legitimacy of going for an independence referendum. So if you've got if SNP have an overall majority, then yeah, I can understand that. That is a very strong position to be in, to be saying to Westminster, we're going to do this one way or another, we're going to do it. But don't quite understand why. I mean, is it so much of a weaker position if they don't have an overall majority of seats in Holyrood, but plus the Green seats, there's a definite overall majority for independence and an ability to vote things through in Holyrood. I mean, I can see it's a bit weaker, but is it really such a big disadvantage?
Well, you just have to look at the situation now, because that's where we are at the moment. There is a majority of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament who are independent supporting MSPs. But it means that Westminster can turn around easily and say, you don't have an electoral mandate, because we're not in a formal coalition with the Greens. Remember, the Greens have refused to join a coalition with the SNP from way back, right, since 2007. So we are a minority government. And that is quite a weak position to be in politically when you are in this constitutional argument. It makes it easy for Boris and Lord Snooty and the rest to turn round, and deny these sort of things. And it makes it much harder for us. But if we get that electoral majority, the power of the people of Scotland behind us, we can say, it was in our referendum, it was in our mandate. We put to the people of Scotland at an election. They said, go for it. They elected us with a majority. We're here. We're demanding this. Yeah. We're not asking for a Section 30. We're demanding it. You don't give us it, we'll go ahead.
Yeah. And you think that would still be the case if, when you add the Green vote and the SNP vote together, if that's over 50% of the votes cast, still you wouldn't regard that as having an overall majority for independence?
No, because there are all sorts of let-out causes for them. Like they can say, yeah, but you're not 50% of the electorate. So you haven't got a real mandate. People decide to have nothing to do with it. That's also one of the weaknesses. If you go for a referendum, which is not properly established, that then everybody who refuses to take part, boycotts it, even dead people, are counted as votes against. The gold standard, as I think everybody accepts, is to get a watertight Section 30-based referendum. The next best option is, with an SNP majority government, to go ahead with a referendum and say, try taking us to court. And then, because we've got the mandate from the electorate here. They voted us in, right? Try. You will look great, won't you, going against the democratic vote? So that's the position. That's the strongest position to be in. And we can do that. We can get to that position if we don't pussyfoot around playing games to try and minimise the number of unionist MSPs. Don't get sucked into that. Go for independence.
I hear what you're saying, Tony, and I share your desire for independence, and it's great to hear the arguments you've put forward for the both votes SNP. Just to go back to the issue you touched on, which I think is a key point, and that was that these small parties that have sprung up are a risk because it's unlikely that they will get enough votes to gain MSPs, but it's possible that they could gain enough votes that would take away from potential SNP votes to damage the vote share of the SNP and hence on the list. But here's the thing, looking apart from the mathematical side of it, looking more at the people and the way that people feel and the choices that people are making, do you think that, there's obviously a reason that some of these parties have sprung up, and that a reason that some folk are considering not giving their second vote to the SNP in terms of certain policies and certain legislation that are not particularly popular with certain sections of the electorate? And I just wondered if you think, I don't know if it's a question that you want to get into, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you think that the party, the SNP, could be doing more at this very crucial time, so soon, before an election? Is there anything they could be doing to stop that drift away?
It's a really good question. And like many of your listeners, frustrates me what's going on sometimes. To me, though, they're important, but they're sideshows to the big question, the big fish that we've got to fry, which is independence. Because I look at it like this, all the things I want to achieve, getting rid of nuclear weapons, building a fairer society, getting a proper distribution of wealth into our country so that people get the benefit of their work, all that stuff. I'm not going to achieve that without independence. To get true equality, we're not going to get that about independence. To actually free the people from the prejudices that are holding groups back, we're not going to get that without independence. We can't even secure our own borders against infections. We're hanging on the coattails of an irresponsible buffoon in these circumstances. We can't be a normal country. So I put that right at the top, and I say we have to become a normal country, and then we can face all these other things. And I look at this and I say, this is where we want to be. And my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, I want them to live in that society. I have a vision of the society I want them to live in. And we can only get that with independence.
Here, Tony.
Here.
That's a great place to stop talking to you. I think I don't think you could have summed it up better. I think it's something that we all want, and you reeled off a lot of the things that people are wanting, the real priorities and the things that all of us who want independence are dreaming of really at this time. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Yeah.
That's a pleasure. Yes.
Good.
And thanks for doing this. You know, every little bit that we do helps us along the path.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Yeah, bye.
So you're back on Indylive.radio and you have been listening to an interview with Tony Grahame. So while we're on the subject of all things SNP, we've been asked by one of the Glasgow branches, Anniesland SNP, to do a shout out for an event that they're holding on Zoom tonight, and that is the Adoption Night special for their MSP Bill Kid. And it's not too late. You can still get a ticket for that. There are some left, and it'll be a great night, hosted by Carol Monaghan, the MP for Glasgow North West, and there'll be speeches, music, comedy, poetry, guest speaker Keith Brown, MSP, the deputy leader of the SNP. So if any of you would like to support Bill's bid for re-election to the Parliament, the tickets are only a £5 and they're available on Eventbrite, and you can find a link to that on Anniesland SNP's Twitter account or Facebook, or just search for it on Eventbrite. So we wish Anniesland SNP a great night tonight.
Indylive Radio.
So you're here on Indie Live Radio with Marlene Halliday and Valerie Gold, and we're absolutely delighted to talk to our next guest, who is a relatively new addition to our team here at Indie Live Radio, Frank McGroarty, also known by his professional DJ name as Frankie Boy. Hello, Frank.
Hello, a professional. I like the sound of that. I'm so glad that's been recorded. Fantastic.
So, Frank, you have the most amazing, colourful career. You've been a ballroom dancer. You've been a Butlins Redcoat. You're a published author with several books. You're a DJ. You've been a DJ, and you still are. And you've got a great music show on the Indie Live Radio. So. That's what we'd like. I don't really know where to start with you because there's so many things to talk about. Maybe we should start talking about your books.
Yep.
And you've written several books, one of which I've bought and I've started, but I haven't been able to finish it yet. But it's your books are more fictional accounts, but based on fact. Would that be correct?
Well, there are fictional stories, but they're mixed with historical fact, because this every time you get an author writing a fictional story, very often there is a factual element to give them a sort of starter for 10. And so what you've got in these 3 books is like a fictionalized version of what happened to me. So the first one, What Time Does Midnight Cabaret Start, was based on the 1982 season. And that's when I first started at Butlins. And so there is a lot of things in there that sort of are very close to home in terms of accuracy. When I first started it was originally going to be an autobiography. And I thought, well, who's going to want to buy an autobiography? Plus the fact that there was so many gaps when I was filling it in. So the thing is, I was allowed to be, you're allowed to have a wee bit of creative license, you know.
Yeah, a bit more scope and a bit more freedom.
Yeah, and as long as it's nothing you can't be sued for, you know, you've got that option, you know. And so, I mean, there's a lot of people doing stories now where it's like fictionalized versions of true stories. And so that's basically what happened with me. There's a lot of true stuff in there, but I'm not. The one thing I'm not going to say is which character's based on what, because they'll expect royalties, and I'm not going to do that.
They probably know themselves, Frank.
But I'll put it this way: it's given their egos a massive boost. Put it that way. But the likes of with the first book, as it started off as a biography, and then eventually I thought, well, I had the creative light, and I just finished doing my degree at the Open Uni. And it was part of it was to do creative writing. And one of the first things they told you was write what you know.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what a better way to start, And so that's how it really all started. And the titles are all very relevant to my actual career working at Butlins, because they were either questions that were asked at the time, or it was statements that were made to us as actual staff members. I mean, that first one, what time does Midnight Cabaret start? We used to get asked that every week. Every single redcoat, no matter what camp you worked at, was always asked that question. And we always got the same reply, 6:30. But that was it always went over their heads,
Do you get people, who have their holidays at Butlins back then? Do you get any people contacting you, having read the books, or any feedback?
When we started the books, I originally looked at it as a work in progress, because my good lady has often referred to me as a literary Philistine, because before I did the creative writing course, there was a lot. English was not one of my best subjects, and the thing is, there was a lot of barriers I had to break down. And the thing was, when I started to write it, I was completely blown away with the response I got in terms of the reviews. The first book, I got 22 reviews on Amazon, and I was not expecting that in the slightest. And the thing is, there are people, we have get-togethers all over the UK. Holidaymakers, we're talking ex-members of staff. We get together for big reunions. I mean, we've been trying to get one at the old Craig Tara site. Whether it's going to happen or not, I don't know. But we've got a big one happening in Torquay later this year. So we're talking ex-members of staff, holidaymakers, and every one of them have all come back to me saying, "Oh, it brings back memories." I mean, that's part of the thing about with these books. It's a fictional story, but the factual element is you get a true insight to what it was like working there, and also to go on holiday there. Because the thing about when you were working at a place like Butlins, it was the worst paid job in the world. But it was the greatest job in the world.
Really enjoyable and fun.
I'll put it this way. We were working a minimum 16-hour shifts.
Wow.
A day. Sometimes it went to about 120 hours a week. And the thing was, you were up at 8:30 in the morning, and you were all the way through to maybe 1 o'clock at night. And the thing is, if you were involved in a show, like with me, it was the Redcoat show, or maybe doing some of the shows, or even Midnight Cabaret. When we were on duty at the Midnight Cabaret, that would take you maybe till 3 o'clock in the morning. And the thing was, so we would finish our shift at 1 o'clock. We'd then have to go over to the Gaiety Theatre to rehearse for the Redcoat show, and we'd still have to be up for 8:30 in the morning.
Oh my goodness.
Perfectly dressed, uniform spotless, have the permanent smile on.
I was going to say, and looking cheery, that would be the...
Yeah. I mean,
that would be the biggest challenge, wouldn't it?
The thing is when you were working in the camp, you always, when you walk past people, if you didn't walk past people and say hello to them, you were in trouble. Because there were instances where we would walk... So there were redcoats one time used to walk along the Stuart Ballroom where the entertainments manager would be looking from the ballroom down on the main road, and if they see the redcoat not saying hello, he would tell them to go back down the stairs, walk to the far end of the camp, and do that walk again.
Oh dear.
So
that sounds more like the army.
But the thing is, it was very disciplined, and the thing is, it had to be. But the thing is, when I joined Butlins in '82. It certainly wasn't because of my personality, because I didn't have one. I joined because I could dance. That was the reason I joined. And a lot of the redcoats became redcoats because they had something that they could basically bring to the table. Some people were qualified sports instructors. Other ones were maybe, let's say, ballroom dance. For me, it was because I did the come dancing before. And that's what basically got me the job. And it was because that happened. I'm working alongside such amazing characters in that place. I mean, when I first walked there, it was Jerry Griffin, Jerry the Tramp. I mean, he was an icon. And you get likes of Big Joe, who was about 20 odd stone, used to walk about dressed as a schoolboy. And And he used to sell the badge. And the thing is, I worked with Joe in 83 and 84. And the thing is, we met up again about 30 odd years later. And he had a fantastic singing voice. His comic timing was absolutely fantastic. And he was such a major influence on me. Same with Jerry Griffin. I mean, we actually got together, Jerry and also Jimmy Livingston, who basically did the band at the Stuart Ballroom. We were part of a group of ex-Redcoats entertaining the sort of the local community groups, the residential homes and all that. Mm-hmm. And we basically put on old style Redcoat shows, and I'm working alongside these guys 30 years after when I first started working with them, you know. And it was...
Well, Frank, can I just interrupt you for a second? Because I'm interested in what you said there about, you know, how you got it because you were a dancer, but mixing with all these people really brought you out your shell. So
yeah.
You were only about 18, or you
18,
were
18
years old.
Aye.
So you would I was thinking when you were saying about, you know, having to work at night and be up and be cheery in the morning. I suppose when you're young, you can do that. You've got the stamina and the energy to do that, haven't you?
Well, when I was, I mean, energy was never an issue, because like when we did the come dance and stuff, you know, we were doing the training. I mean, I'm half the man I am now. You know, I was about 5 or 6 stone lighter than what I am now. The energy was never a problem, but when we were doing the actual working at the camp, it was a culture shock for me. Yeah. Because to quote my good lady, I was sweet and innocent in those days, and I used to call myself shy. But I mean, I used to do. I came from a performing background, but the thing was, when it came to the interaction, being around major characters, that was a big shock to the system. Something I had to get used to over a period of time, and that happened when I was working in 82, because, as I said, we were working with some major extroverts, and the likes of, when you were talking about the likes of Jerry Griffin, he was the compere at the camp. And we used to do a competition at the camp, which a competition you could not run today because of the politically correct world we live in. It was called the Cheerful, Charming and Chubby competition. Yeah. and the thing was, I'm Mr. Shy 18-year-old, and Jerry was comparing, and there was one round where they asked one of the women, who's your favourite film star? And so you say Robert Redford. And he said, right. And he used to come out, he dragged me on the floor. He would put me in the middle of the Stuart Ballroom, 3,500 people watching what's going on. And he says to this woman, right, this is not Frank the Redcoat. This is Robert Redford. This is your favourite film star. What would you do to this favourite film star if you met him? And she said, would you go up and give him a nice big cuddle? I mean, oh, yes. And he said, what does he look like? Oh, he's lovely. And so she says, right, you've got to walk up nice and sexy to him and give him a big hug. And the woman didn't know her own strength. Next thing I know, I'm on the floor. And ends up the two other redcoats are basically grabbing me by the ankles and pulling me off. And this is me mega shy. So this is me getting thrown in the deep end, you know? That
does sound like a real culture shock for a young, sweet and innocent 18-year-old.
Yep.
So Frank, you met your wife in
yes.
Buckland? You worked together?
Yeah, it was, she worked in the kitchens in 82. And it was a bit, I think we could describe it as a bit of a conspiracy setup, because during those early days, we became very good friends with the kitchen staff and a lot of people from other departments, because the main thing is when you look at the books, you will see, even though it's got a strong redcoat theme, redcoats were not just part of the whole equation at Butlins. There were so many other different departments that made Butlins what it was. You know, it'd be wrong for me to suggest otherwise. I mean, yes, we're at the front because we've got the high profile uniforms and all that. But the thing is, Butlins couldn't survive without the amusement park, the bar staff, and all this kind of stuff. You know, and the thing was, Wendy was working in the kitchens, and it ended up I'm on the dance floor, and somebody comes up to me and says, I want to dance with Wendy. You're going to do me a favour? I want to dance with Mary, who was a chalet mate. Can you do me a favour and dance with Wendy? Went, okay. So it ends up, when I went over, all the kitchen staff that were sitting beside her all moved over to the opposite side of the table. So she's sitting there on her own. And eventually it was my first ever slow dance. And the thing was, the following year she became a redcoat. And we got engaged whilst on duty.
Oh, how romantic.
I did the whole lot, bended knee, the whole works. And it was, we were on duty at the train station. See that photograph we see on the Indy Live radio?
Yeah.
That was on our anniversary. We went to the train station in our red uniform because that's how we got engaged. We were on duty at the train station. And so I got down in bended knee. There was a crowd formed around us, and so I got a round of applause and a box of chocolates. That was my first engagement present.
That sounds like you were well past your shy young man stage then.
But put it this way, 82 was a transformation. 83, you then started to realize you were starting to find your role, your niches, where you wanted to go.
Yeah.
And so when we got to 84, we knew that was going to be the final season. And then we got married the following year.
So you were only about 19 or 20 when you got engaged, when you proposed?
We proposed when I was 20. We knew it was going to happen anyway. And we just took our time. We didn't name the day. We just said, right, engaged. Because at Butlins, if you're with somebody for more than a fortnight, people are expecting wedding invitations,
So, and that's how your first book that I've started reading, What Time is the Midnight Cavalry, which I think is a funny title. That's how it starts off, of course. It starts off with a married couple going to a reunion and then having a flashback.
Yeah.
So that's a really nice way to start it. So I'm getting into it, but unfortunately, because we're so busy, I haven't had time to finish it yet. But I'm looking forward to doing that.
So Frank, how was it that you got involved with it was Latin American ballroom dancing, I think, in particular, wasn't it? Is that it's a wee bit unusual, isn't it, for a wee lad from Greenock?
Well, the thing was, my parents were products of the jigging at the dance halls back in the day. And I mean, I talk about things like going to my dad would maybe say he'd maybe go to the likes of the local halls, the Craigburn and all that kind of stuff. And they joined the local dance school, Bob Williamson in Greenock. And when it became known they were trying to recruit a dance class for the younger element, my brother and I were, how shall I put it, persuaded to go. And the thing was, is the two of us went to it, and within about 3 weeks we were taking our exams. That's how it basically all started. When my brother turned 16, he joined the Scotland team, the Scotland Latin American Information Team. When he was 16, I kind of stopped the dancing when I was 12, and then I came back to it when I turned 16 again because they were looking for guys, and it was. But my brother had already done Blackpool. He'd been in the doing things like going to Belgium and competing in European Championships and all that. And when they were looking for guys, he suggested that to me, and I thought to myself, well, I fancy some of that myself. And it ended up, we went up to Tiffany's in Glasgow, and that's how it all started. And it was like, I was there for about 3 years, and it was when the team disbanded. It was like 6 months down the line. That's when the advert for the job for Butlins came up,
Yeah.
But it was when you come from a sort of background when it's like they love the dance, and it was a natural progression,
Yeah. I know my mum and dad used to, they were from Fife, not the West Coast, but good dancers. And I used to say to Mum, but how did you learn how to do a quick step? And she'd look at me and she'd say, well, you just go, don't you? And you get a decent partner. And if you've got a decent partner, you just pick it up. And I'm going, yeah, okay. I've never managed to pick it up that way, but
You do it, yeah, exactly. I mean, the likes of the stuff that we did, it was very high energy stuff. The videos of the performances are actually on YouTube. For both the competitions that we did.
Wow.
And the thing was, I was really I became more and more into it because of the high energy element of it. And that high energy element kind of sort of took me on forward to Butlins, because every night you're sweating like crazy because of the amount of energy you're expanding. And that kind of set me in good stead. You know, at least that part did. You know, the personality bit came later.
And after Butlins, you were very highly involved in journalism and in radio in particular. I mean, I noticed that you actually had your own radio show for a Spanish radio station, Radio Nova FM.
Yeah.
How did that come about? That's really interesting.
Well, when originally I originally was doing radio shows in Fergusley Park, Paisley, with a very familiar name to Indylive Radio by the name of Michael McEwen.
Oh, Michael, yeah.
Michael and I go back a long way. He was the babe magnet of the partnership. And when the Fergusley Park Radio stopped, him and I ventured onto an online radio station called Hit Music Radio. And it was through there we were getting to work alongside some real high-profile presenters, you know, some guys with Radio 1 experience and all that. It was absolutely amazing. And it was through that some of these guys moved on to the Radio Nova station, and they asked me if I wanted to present it. So I was doing a weekend show on a Saturday and Sunday, and I was basically recording it from home, sending it to them, and they would broadcast it live from their studio.
So you weren't actually in Spain then, you were just doing it remotely?
Yeah, I was doing it remotely, but the only time I became an issue was somebody actually turned up at the studio wanting to meet me, because they were convinced I was a wee short-haired, spiky blonde guy. And I had to try and keep the image going. But since likes of the Hit Music Radio, I mean, I've been doing recording remotely. I mean, likes of up until when we did Fergusley Park Radio, me and Mike recorded in the studio. But the thing was, after that, we recorded wherever we could find a space.
Yeah.
Just to record. I mean, Mike and I used to record our shows sitting in the front seat of my car.
So the Fergusley Park Radio, was that like something that was like particularly relevant to the folk in the Figi, I believe it's known?
I think that's what it's called, aye. But the thing was, the Fergusley Park Radio was, I would say, the roots of the late lunchtime experience. Ah,
right, okay.
Because that's where me and Mike first developed the concept of it all. We were doing stupid, out off the wall stunts. We were doing sort of real sort of fun elements on the show, and that kind of sort of just continued to develop all the time. And we did try and keep it going when we were doing the online stuff. But the thing was, Mike, the two of us basically went through our own sort of, we diverted in our different routes and all that, and it became difficult to try and get together to do the shows, you know. But you know, never say never. Anything's possible. I might do something with Maggie in the future. You never know.
Because I believe you went through quite a challenging period yourself, Frank, in terms of your health, that led to a publication of an ebook, the Thyroid Diaries. Because
what it is when I turned 50, I discovered a very large lump on the side of my neck, and I was just before my 50th birthday. I discovered the large lump on the side of my neck, and I went to get it x-rayed, and the surgeon at the time said it was very common in middle-aged men, which I took great affront to at the time. And it wasn't until later on a surgeon contacted me and says, right, you've been referred to general surgery. And they suddenly were starting to do tests and things, and they then said it was a tumour. It was thyroid cancer. And which, to be honest, I kind of, I was okay. You know, I wasn't getting myself in a panic. But what threw me off guard a little bit was the link to this form of cancer was the Chernobyl disaster.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Which kind of freaked me out a bit. And the thing was, when you have any health issues, my first sort of concept is always know your enemy, you know, because the more if you get the right information, at least you understand what you're dealing with. And your thing is, you be a bit more focused. I mean, I knew there was a number of guys former Butlins guys who had cancer, who were very positive in the way their outlook was, you know, like saying, you know, I've got it, but it's not got me. I've just got to be safe. Let's just get on with it. Right, this is what it is. How do we deal with it? And so I did research. I looked at the different videos, and because of my journalistic background, I was able to identify the true stuff rather than the rubbish, the scare stories.
I understand.
And it was a major, major boost for me, because when I went into these 2 operations, I was 2 operations plus I had radium treatment done, and I was a bit more prepared for it all. And this Thyroid Diaries thing, this originally evolved through a blog that I did. I had a blog site, and I kind of sort of was writing down what was happening on a day-to-day basis, and it seemed to be people were actually being very appreciative of that. They thought it was a good thing, and this was me, because the information was very helpful to me. This was me giving something back. Yeah. And when I did it on the blog, I thought, well, why not just make it as an ebook, and people can download it for free. Because the one thing, because I always insisted, I wanted to make it available to as many people as possible, and it's not going to cost them. Hopefully, it'll be some use to them. And it's got some humour in it, but it's also got the sort of the testing times, you know. Yeah. I mean, when I did the radium treatment, I had to carry a card with me for 3 months because it became radioactive, and I had to carry the card with me in case I set off any alarms.
Oh my goodness.
And so the day I got released from hospital, I had the card in my hand. First thing I did was I went to my local supermarket, and I kid you not, I walked in and out of the entrance, and not once did the alarm go off. I was so disappointed.
So, and you're fully recovered and well now?
Well, I mean, I'm fine. I mean, I lost a lot of weight during the last year, but that was me going on a bit of a fitness thing. What they basically do is they don't sign you off. They just got to keep tabs on your blood levels and all that kind of thing, because my thyroids have gone, you know, so it's just a case of you've got to keep you just keep an eye on the blood levels. Plus, as an added bonus, I get rid of my double chin at the same time, which is great.
So that's good to know. And so tell us a little bit about how you ended up with, we're very fortunate and lucky to have you. What led you to Indylive Radio? Is that through Michael, or is it also because you have a big commitment to independence for Scotland? Well,
the actual getting hooked up with the station is Michael. We have to blame Michael for that one.
He's a great guy, Michael.
He's very good, Mike. Yeah.
I recommend, whenever you get the chance, look on the video of the late lunchtime experience, where you'll see Michael McEwen and myself getting our legs waxed for charity. That's a sight to behold. But he was the one that got me involved with the station. As far as in terms of the cause is concerned, apart from the broadcasting, I'm involved. I have my own website. I have a couple of websites. One of them is called Planet Ecos. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we did was cover the first Indylive, first Indyref back in 2014. So I'm actually out and about. I'm covering the whole thing, you know that. And my photographer, his son is a member of Parliament for Renfrewshire North.
Ah, is that
Newlands?
Gavin Newlands.
Aye, he's Father Gordon. Him and I we've worked together for years.
Oh, wow.
And so the likes of him and I, we have the same train of thought when it comes to the politics, you know. And the likes of when we do the Planet Ecos thing, we get regular updates, and we try and write as positive a thing as much as possible. When I do the lunchtime shows, I try and keep that separate, because the lunchtime show is an entertainment show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and to be honest, that's what I focus on, trying to be entertaining. When we're talking about politics and doing the writing, because when I do the reporting stuff, that's where the Planet Ecos kicks in, you know.
Great. But you are a big supporter of Scottish independence then?
Oh God, aye. When I've been to some of the fundraisers, I mean, I've been reporting on the conferences and stuff like that, you know, and a certain First Minister's got a copy of my first book, so I mean, I cannot complain.
That's great. And have you always, even when you were young, is that something you always, or did you come to sort of political awareness later, or was it something that was always there with you?
I've always had an interest in politics when I was, going back to like some of my school days, because when we were in the class, I mean, it was a class full of revolutionaries, they all fancied taking over the world and all that, and
side.
Oh God, aye. But as I was growing up, we came from, I would say, a very staunch Labour background, because like my dad worked in the shipyards, and the thing was, at the time it was Labour. I mean, the SNP wasn't I would say, a major force at the time. It was like about 4 or 5 MPs, and that's probably about it.
Yeah.
When we moved through to West Lothian, we were focusing more on the people who actually could do a job for people in the actual in the area, and that's when I started to vote for the SNP. And the thing is, the more you see the stuff on the TV, the hypocrisy of some of them is just unbelievable. Because when my journalistic background, I know when somebody asks them a question, I know they're trying to sidestep it. So I know when somebody's coming out with the brown stuff, and it's always the political thing. I mean, I've always, I'm always one for accountability. I mean, the thing is, the whole point about Brexit was accountability. So the thing is, that's the way I've looked at it in terms of the independence thing. If somebody makes mistakes, let's make it be our own mistakes. I've always, I mean, I do not expect, if they said, right, Indy F2 happens and you get a yes vote, I'm not saying it's going to be plain sailing, because it's certainly, there's not going to be anything plain sailing. But the thing is, if you're going to make mistakes, at least it's our own mistakes, and if somebody can do a better job, at least who's going to get voted in is going to be people you feel is going to do a better job in period, Yeah. But there were so many. I mean, that was one thing it kind of annoyed me when we covered it for the Planet of Cos, was I was picking up so many of the lies that was going on.
Was this in 2014?
Aye, all the thing, people turning up at the doors saying, "Oh, you're going to lose your pensions," and all that.
Yeah.
I remember interviewing the MP, him that's got the goatee beard that drove the fire engine around the place.
Chris, that's terrible.
You know who I'm talking about, aye?
Yeah, I do.
Him, that's the one. So I mean, I got a lot of interviews with a lot of the guys involved in the various aspects, and they were telling me all the different. I was hearing all the different stories, and it was so frustrating to hear, all the and stuff coming out you knew was rubbish. And to be honest, it's not just a case of persuading. The thing is, you're actually having to fight against, the propaganda stuff that's going on down south. Because like one of our friends down south, when he says, all we ever hear about is independence. That's all they talk about, independence. So, well, they don't actually. They're talking about other things that they're doing. You just don't hear it. You're reading the wrong papers.
The boys in Labour that never stopped talking about independence. By the way, it's Chris Law.
That's the one.
I know who you mean. He's really tall and he drove the spirit of independence.
That's it. That's it. Yeah,
a Dundee MP. He's a Dundee MP, isn't he?
That's right. Now the likes of I knew that a lot of the stuff that was getting sent around was lies, and the thing is, as I said, the thing about the guys down south, they were basically getting their information based on what they're getting down south through the papers, the Daily Mails and all that, and I know when I read the papers that how it's a pile of rubbish, and unfortunately the thing is, you've got to persuade people to go over the argument, but you've also got to persuade people when it comes to actually knowing this is propaganda. Because I think it was at the council election, it was only one side was talking about for the council, but they talked about independence all the time.
It was, yeah. That was you get a flyer through the door, and it would be from the Scottish Conservatives, and it would be full of, we're the only people that can stop the SNP. We're the only people that can stop independence. And you think, you're going to tell me what policies you've got? But there was
exactly. And I think David Heyman highlighted that on one of the question time thing, and said it was. I think they only mentioned maybe once. But the thing is, when you look at the other ones, it was about 20 odd times, and just the one flyer,
Yeah.
And that's how ridiculous it's getting, because it's not just a case of convincing people with the argument. You're going to be getting stuff left, right, and centre. Plus, the thing is, you're getting all the trolls and all that on there as well, which is not helping.
That's true.
You know,
Also, I think, Frank, I don't know if you would agree, but the idea of the truth and lies seems to be more and more difficult in present day politics. It used to be that if people were caught lying, then it was a matter for resignation. But now we have a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom who is a proven liar, who's been sacked by the Tory party, sacked by the Times for telling lies.
yeah.
And yet he's thought fit to be the leader of a political party and to be a Prime Minister of the country. And it seems to me that we've seen it in America, that the idea now is that if you tell a lie loud enough and often enough, people start believing it, even though logically it can be proved that it's wrong.
That's basically the first rule of propaganda. I mean, see, when you're talking about going back to, say, like the pre-war, when you were looking at all the newsreels and stuff like that, they just kept on repeating the same mantra all the time, and then eventually there was always going to be, you just needed one person to believe it, and that one person became two, and so forth and so forth. And that's why you're getting like something with social media. There's so much misinformation going on there. People are just looking for the easy way out in terms of when it comes to research and, try to find out more information about something. They don't want to read maybe the papers. Their source of information is social media, and a large percentage of social media is not true at all.
Yeah,
that's true. And I mean, a lot of people never even, they never get past the headline. There's a headline for something, they retweet it or they repost it on, Facebook, but haven't themselves actually gone in and even and read it to see what they think themselves about its truthfulness. So, are you optimistic about the next referendum?
Well, I think the main train of thought is they will go for a referendum when they know they're going to actually win it. I think that's the main thing, because it was so, they started off on a very low level when it came to the with the percentage, and it wasn't until the latter stages when we had they were suddenly creeping in front, and then that's when we had the big Star Wars march up to the.
Oh
yeah, that was great. I happened to be in Buchanan Street when that was going on. I couldn't believe it. Actually, it was just
panic.
Fantastic. Yeah,
it was panic stations. But the other thing is maybe worth looking at is, like, see, when we voted for the Scottish Parliament in '97, they just missed out on getting the Scottish Parliament. But when they came back to it, it was a resounding vote in favour. So, and the thing is, there's been a lot of stuff going on in the news in terms of the national, the other side of the nationalistic argument, in terms of the Brexit and all this kind of stuff. And the thing is, the arguments for and against is getting stronger and stronger all the time. You're going to start you're seeing it slowly moving in the right direction, and that's got to be encouraging. That's got to be encouragement. The main thing is it's having the plan in place to actually make him say yes. That's the big problem. I mean, I know there is other potential options available, but the thing is, I can see in the papers down south the amount of stirring that's going on to try and get all the animosity going and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. You could see it's like the thing in the court where you. If somebody's going in defending of a crime, the first thing you want to do is to try and sort of degrade the main accuser rather than try to prove the point. You're trying to make them look bad rather than prove the argument. And I think this is what we're seeing here. But I did say to Gordon when the first one happened, I says, just be ready for the dirty tricks.
Yeah,
and it's going to be the same thing again.
I think it'll be worse this time, because last time they went into it, the reason we were given it is because support for independence was in the low 20s, so they thought, well, they've got no chance, but they got a huge fright, and this time the polls are all, what have we had, 21, 22 polls at over 50%, some in the high 50s. So
I think there was a very good documentary about it on the BBC It was a 3-part documentary about the whole referendum thing.
Oh yeah, inside the referendum.
Yeah, I thought it was very balanced. I thought it was a very balanced thing.
Yeah.
What you were talking about, the idea of they thought it was a giver, you know, and then suddenly think, well, it's not as straightforward as what you think it is, and I think that was a very balanced argument. But I mean, obviously, May's going to be the key.
Yeah.
May's going to be the key.
Yeah.
If they get, you know, if they get a strong, if they get a majority, I mean, when the whole reason they set up the parliament was to stop a majority, and the fact that they got a majority, I think, put the frighteners on them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the Haunt system is really designed to stop one party having an overall majority. That's the whole point. That's the whole.
There was a flaw.
I mean, that might be true. I suppose that might be true, but on the other hand, there are positives that come out of having a proportional representation.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying it's a bad system. I'm just saying it's designed not to produce an overall majority.
They thought. I mean, they were doing it because they were trying to give the proportion of people with votes cast. But the thing was, what they thought was it was going to, as you say, stop the one party taking, you know, full control. And so when that happened back a few years ago, that kind of said, oh, there's suddenly a flaw in the argument. They never thought that was going to happen.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
But it's very interesting to hear about all. I mean, we knew you were on the show and we've on the station and we've heard your show, but to hear all the background to all the things that you've done in the past is really interesting, Frank. And I believe in the future, your next project, you're going to be looking at a novel on American football. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, that is correct. What it is, in my journalistic career, 15 years, I covered American football in Scotland. And I'm talking about the junior British senior leagues and all that stuff. And because of my dancing background, I also covered the cheerleaders as well. Reported on that I'm talking about. And
story, and you're sticking to it. Absolutely.
I even one time I wrote an article where I actually trained with the cheerleaders one night. At one of their sessions, and I came away. I've never been so knackered in my life. But the likes of I've covered all elements from the likes of the junior game, the senior game, even the professional game with the Claymores. I've got all that experience in there, and I've got the story already written. It's just
going to be here in Scotland or in America.
It's going to the story. The main story. It's going to be centred in Scotland.
Right.
It's going to be about American football in Scotland.
Okay.
I mean, it's going to start off from America, but the thing is, think Quiet Man. That's probably the best way. The Quiet Man. Think of that sort of line.
Like the John Wayne film.
Aye. Aye. So basically, the thing is, it'll start off maybe America, but they'll eventually come to sort of focus in Scotland, and it'll be even though it's American football, it'll be a Scottish theme running through it. And because I've covered the game for so long at the American football, I mean, Scotland was really good at that game. You know, if there was ever a game designed for the Scottish mentality, it was American football. I mean, when they first started, I mean, they didn't. Some of the teams couldn't afford shoulder pads. They actually put rolled up towels underneath their shirts. But I mean, that it's a natural progression, to be honest, to go for that. I mean, before I do that one, I'm going to do a short stories one first of all. I mean, I think the first thing though is I've got to take a break. I mean, I've spent ages working on that last book.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was
the donkeys up the stairs.
Yes. That's how do you get the donkeys up the stairs? The final season. That is that's an example of one of the questions we used to get asked at the camp, because we used to run. There was the donkey derby.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we used to do the donkey derby on the sports field, and we had to announce that what happens if it rains. Says we'll hold it in the Stuart Ballroom. And the cast is the question, how do you get the donkeys up the stairs? And sometimes you would get the redcoats coming to the side of the stage saying, we need the assistance of 4 strong men to help us. We get these donkeys into the ballroom, and they actually turn up at the side of the stage.
Oh, you must have had some fun. Well,
Yeah,
we've had some fun listening to you today, Frank. And I'm
absolutely.
Really enjoying your book so far, and hopefully I'll get to the end of the trilogy at some point because I'm enjoying the first one.
But that's great. That's great to hear. Thanks very much for that. I mean, certainly. I have suggested doing something with the station. I've offered the full set as a competition.
Or a couple of people are trying to think through the best way to make it happen. So I'm sure they'll be in touch with you once we get it sorted. Yeah. But it's just been great talking to you, Frank. I mean, look, I'll have to admit here, I didn't even know American football was a thing in Scotland. I mean, far less that anyone could play it professionally.
You haven't seen anything. Scotland versus England at American football is something else. I have to say.
Yeah, I bet.
We used to have the British National Leagues ran the Home Nations Trophy, where Scotland had never lost a single game. The thing is about American football, it's not a complicated sport to watch, but it's a complicated one to play because that's when it's really complex. I mean, somebody described it once as chess with violins.
Well, that'll be a topic for another day, I think.
Absolutely.
We've touched on a lot of things: ballroom dancing, butlins, American football, and close to our hearts, Scottish independence. And we'd just like to thank you very, very much, Frank, for coming on to the show and talking to us today.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's nice to put the face to the voices for a change.
So hopefully we'll talk to you again. And listeners, keep tuned to Indy Live Radio to find out about that competition to win the trilogy.
That's great. Thanks a lot.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that interview with Frank McGroarty. And now we've got some more music for you. Both choices from Frank, and it fits in with the nostalgic theme of his books. First track you're going to hear is Do the Hucklebuck. I'm sure some of you out there will remember doing the Hucklebuck. Do the Hucklebuck by Coast to Coast, followed by Haircut 100 with Fantastic Day. And we hope you are having a fantastic day listening to Indy Live Radio. So here we go, Coast to Coast with Do the Hucklebuck and Haircut 100 with Fantastic.
So that's us come to the end of the daytime show. Val and I hope you've enjoyed it. But just before we go, if you're listening in later on this evening, there's a locker room sports roundup at 6 o'clock. 7 o'clock, Steve B's back with more music and musings, followed by the Scottish Album of the Year programme at 9 o'clock and Jazz Hour at 10. Saturday morning, we've got the James E Show at 10 a.m, Dr. Dave's back at 3 o'clock, and we hope you enjoyed both interviews this morning, quite different, but two really great guys to chat to. Tony Grahame is the most recent person that Val and I have talked to about the Holyrood voting system, Holyrood list voting system, pros and cons of how to use our votes in this very important election that's coming up in May. We've interviewed a range of people with a range of views about how best to use that vote. Please look on our SoundCloud and Podbean on-demand channels where you'll find the other interviews. On the SoundCloud on-demand channel, there's a playlist called Holyrood Voting Intentions. If you go into that, you'll find a lot of very good information from a range of views, help you make up your own mind. Our other guest this morning, Frank McGroarty, has very kindly donated a set of his books, and we're running a competition. To enter the competition, just go to Indylive Radio page on Facebook. All you have to do is tell us your 3 favourite music genre, and we'll put you into the competition. I think it runs for a couple of weeks, and then we'll put everyone's name into the hat, as it were, and who knows, you might be lucky, get a set of Frank's books. One last thing. Next week, 5th of March, Val and I are putting together a daytime show special edition to celebrate International Women's Day. We'll then repeat it again on Monday morning, the 8th of March, which is actual International Women's Day. We've got, I've lost count of the number of contributors we've got. It's certainly a couple of dozen. We've been interviewing them, chatting to them all this week. The next few days we'll finish doing that, do a wee bit of editing, work out the running order, work out what music to put in, and we think it's going to be a really good programme. Don't miss that then. International Women's Day Special Edition, Friday the 5th of March.
Indylive.radio. The Daytime Show.